When you look at a map of the world, it's so easy to just assume that all those neat, color-coded lines dividing countries have, well, just always been there, right? We tend to think they're rooted in these ancient, undeniable truths about who people are. But what if I told you that nations, and the ethnic borders that define them, are actually relatively modern inventions? That the very idea of a nation wasn't just born, but had to be actively constructed? We are going to completely flip your understanding of history today in this explainer. We're unpacking the fascinating and honestly sometimes shocking story behind how national identities were built.
To break this all down, we're going to hit 5 key areas: the imagined community, language and national identity, a tale of 2 nations, the multilingual exception, and finally, the Austro-Hungarian counterexample. Let's get right into it. All right, section 1, the imagined community. To really understand this, we have to look at the incredibly high stakes of modern nationalism. Because this isn't just dry history, this is something people are willing to fight for.
The story behind this specific threat is absolutely wild. So, anthropologist Anastasia Karakasidou wrote this brilliant book basically arguing that the idea of Macedonia being inherently Greek was a construction, an identity actively invented by Greek nationalists over time. Well, when her manuscript was sitting at a major university press, the publisher actually received this exact bomb threat. And they backed out. They literally dropped the book entirely. Karakasidou later got hate mail, including a picture of herself with a Greek flag stabbed right through her heart. This extreme reaction really hits the nail on the head. National identities are fiercely protected precisely because they are constructed. They are, in a very real way, imaginary. This all brings us to Benedict Anderson's famous concept of imagined communities. Think about it. If you consider yourself a member of a certain nationality, you're agreeing to a profound link with millions of strangers. You are never, ever going to meet the vast majority of your fellow citizens, yet you still feel this deep inherent bond with them. Why? Well, because that community has been socially constructed. It was literally imagined into existence through shared narratives, state actions, and huge economic changes. Moving right along to section 2, language and national identity. Let's look at the absolute most powerful tool ever used to build these imagined communities. We usually just assume that distinct linguistic cultures have been around for millennia, but here's the crazy part. You really can't have a formal, standardized national identity without the basic building blocks of language, right? Like a dictionary or a formal grammar book. Well, the very first Ukrainian grammar book wasn't published in the Middle Ages. It was 1819. The first Norwegian grammar book, which is what actually helped distinguish it from Danish and Swedish, didn't arrive until 1848. And get this, a complete, comprehensive Czech-German dictionary, that took all the way until 1935 to finish. Before these shockingly recent dates, the linguistic borders that define modern nationalism were, frankly, incredibly blurry. So, did historic states actually have a single unified language from the beginning? We tend to think, well, the French always spoke French and the Germans always spoke German, right? Actually, scratch that. The reality on the ground was way messier and much more fragmented. Let's look at France, which is often held up as the gold standard of a unified national identity. During the French Revolution at the end of the 18th century, literally half the population of France did not even speak French. If you were traveling around the country back then, you'd basically need 5 different dictionaries. Up north in Dunkirk, they spoke Dutch. Over in Alsace, a German dialect. Down south, Provençal and Occitan. In the southwest, Catalan and Basque, which are totally unrelated to French. And out in Brittany, they spoke Breton. A true French national identity had to be aggressively constructed way later, largely between 1880 and 1910. The state used railroads, mandatory military draft, and standardized schools to quite literally teach the population how to be French.
Okay, section 3, a tale of 2 nations. It's one thing to talk about this in theory, but to see it happen in real time is fascinating. Using the work of historian Timothy Snyder, we can put Lithuania and Belarus side by side, 2 neighboring regions with wildly different outcomes. In Lithuania, for the longest time, the elites wanted absolutely nothing to do with the Lithuanian language. They spoke Polish to show off their high status, kind of looking down on Lithuania as just a rough peasant language. But then, in the late 19th century, Lithuanian intellectuals and poets, like a guy named Kudirka, suddenly did a 180 and embraced this peasant language. They realized the peasants had preserved their unique roots. So priests start giving sermons in Lithuanian, literature is getting smuggled across the border from Germany, and boom, they constructed this fierce national identity. Now look at Belarus right next door.
Totally different story. They had no vernacular priests. Their literature was heavily suppressed. The educated elites there basically just called themselves Russian if they were Orthodox or Polish if they were Catholic. Because the elites never rallied around a shared linguistic identity, a distinct Belarusian national identity essentially didn't even exist until the 1920s and 30s. It's just a perfect example of how an imagined community catches fire in one place and completely stalls out in another. Which brings us to Section 4, the multilingual exception. So wait, does this mean a single unified language is absolutely strictly required to build an imagined community? Absolutely not. Switzerland completely shatters that rule. You've got 71% speaking Swiss German, 22% speaking French, 5% Italian, and a small fraction speaking Romansh. No single unifying language whatsoever, yet Switzerland is a highly prosperous, incredibly stable nation. How? Because they collectively constructed a decentralized identity. Back in 1891, they celebrated the 600th anniversary of the Swiss Confederation, basically tracing their imagined community all the way back to 1291. It proves you can for sure have a strong national identity without a dominant language, as long as the diverse groups share a tolerant, collective belief in the idea of the nation itself. And finally, Section 5, the Austro-Hungarian counterexample. We're going to look at a massive empire that defied all the rules of modern ethnic nationalism. When historians look back at the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it's so easy to just blame its ultimate fall on competing ethnic claims that, eventually sparked World War I. But that's actually the wrong way to look at it. The real historical mystery here, what we should really be asking is, how on earth did this wildly diverse, polyglot regime manage to survive and hold together for as long as it did? Because we're not talking about 2 or 3 groups here. Within the borders of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, there were 15 major, distinct nationalities. You had Germans, Hungarians, Croats, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Romanians, the whole shebang, all trying to balance together under one massive imperial umbrella. So how exactly did they pull this off without forcing everyone to assimilate? Instead of forcing one ethnic identity down everyone's throats, the empire relied on 5 brilliantly pragmatic pillars. First, the German language. But here's the catch. They didn't force people to identify as ethnically German. German was just the language of the bureaucracy. If you wanted a good government job, you learned German. This created a unified administrative class. Second, a unified middle class in the major cities, largely made up of German and Jewish populations who deeply believed in the empire's stability. Third was immense dynastic loyalty. Emperor Franz Joseph had been on the throne since 1848. He was like this constant stabilizing grandfather figure for millions of people. Fourth, the Catholic Church acted as a massive unifying force across many different ethnic lines. And finally, the army. Unlike a lot of other European armies that were totally hated for crushing local protests, the Austro-Hungarian army was largely respected. It represented social promotion and unity for all 15 nationalities. These pillars built an allegiance to the state itself, entirely bypassing the need for modern ethnic nationalism. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to think about how completely this reframes our view of the world. We've seen how languages were codified shockingly late, how local dialects were basically erased, how elites adopted peasant tongues to invent unity out of thin air, and how massive empires held diverse people together through structure rather than blood. So, as you look around the world today, at the borders causing intense debate, pride, and sometimes conflict, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. If nationalism is a tool so recently constructed by language, literature, and elites, which of our modern borders are actually ancient and real, and which are simply imagined? Thanks so much for joining me, and keep questioning what you think you know.